All right. Tonight's presentation, when we started Restorations, it didn't necessarily have to be about a bike that was finished. The history of Manitoba motorcycling in some capacity also will fit the bill. So today's story is about the Dunlop Trophy. And those of you that are members, you can proudly tell people this is Canada's oldest motorcycle trophy for competition. All right. The Dunlop Tire Company, if you can believe it, began promoting races in Canada in 1907, 1908. Not motorcycles. Well, maybe, but we don't know. I can't find any history in that. But car racing. And I'll get into some of the other things, but for example, they built the, well, I'm getting ahead of myself, the Kirkfield racetrack, the 1 mile racetrack was at Sturgeon. We're going to get there. Donated by the Dunlop Tire Motor Company to the Manitoba Motorcycle Club in 1911 for annual competition. Originally started with the 50-mile-an-hour races. Now, I'm glad Mark Barabo's here because his grandfather's name's going to pop up every now and then. And the reason being, in 1909, there was the Winnipeg Motorcycle Club. When the paperwork was being done probably 10, 12 years ago to get into the Hall of Fame, the people doing exploratory work were saying, the Winnipeg Motorcycle Club shows up. Like, how does this work? Well, there was the Winnipeg Motorcycle Club in 1909. Mark has pictures in the family album going back to 1909. And Don's put one of those pictures up and says 1911 Manitoba Motorcycle Club. We're going to correct that tonight because I have an original picture from 1911 from the Manitoba Motorcycle Club's first reliability run, September 1911, in front of the Free Press building. So he'll change that over, but that's not going to... What happened was the Manitoba Motorcycle Club, and Joe Barabo became one of the founders in 1911. They were racers, and they were real enthusiasts. The Winnipeg Motorcycle Club continued, but it petered out in World War I. Maybe they didn't come back, we don't know, or the Manitoba Motorcycle Club became too big, but it became the entity, of which now you are the Manitoba Motorcycle Club. Parker Fillmore, God rest his soul, incorporated us in 2010. He did all the paperwork, so the name Manitoba Motorcycle Club can never be stolen, and we are the Antique Motorcycle Club of Manitoba and the Manitoba Motorcycle Club. That's the shirt I'm wearing today. The boys and girls in the club made this up a while ago. Tom Wilcock, my friend in Toronto, believes that there are only 2 trophies donated by the Dunlop Tire Company in 1911 because Tom has the one from Toronto in his personal collection. Big collector. Ziggy knows Tom. He's been around forever. He's got original race machines from 1911 that Canadians raced at the races in Toronto in 11 and 12. It makes sense because Toronto was a hotbed for motorcycle racing, and so was Winnipeg. The Indian Motorcycle Company was so large in 1911 and selling so many motorcycles, they moved a plant to build motorcycles in Toronto, Ontario in 1912. They painted them blue. I'm restoring one right now. So next year there'll be a restorations on a 1912 blue. Tom's made up the actual decals from the 1912 motorcycle. The Toronto Trophy also is 1911. It's exactly the same as this one, except the names on the plaques will be different. Okay? The trophy was won by one or several people in the local club, depending on the type of competition. If you've read these, some of them say solo and some say sidecar. It depended on the competition. I'm going to get to how many, there's only 8 here. That's interesting, and I think I have a valid reason for that. Later, the trophy in Toronto was donated by Dunlop Trophy to Percy McBride's motorcycle shop in Toronto. It's an old, long-time name in Toronto, and he was like the Northwest Cycle here in Winnipeg. In early 8, 9, 10, Percy McBride had multiple brands at his motorcycle shop. So it makes sense that Dunlop would give it to that motorcycle shop. Here, Northwest Cycle, who has multiple brands that many of you are familiar with. If you've got enough gray hair, you probably kick tires in there. They didn't start business till 1912. So if they're donating trophies, who are they going to donate it to in Winnipeg? They're going to donate it to the Manitoba Motorcycle Club, the end-all be-all for for motorcycles of the day and the racers. Later, McBride donated his trophy after many years to the Toronto Motorcycle Club. Again, the dominant motorcycle club whose areas and members in the area began winning the local trophy on a regular basis. So he just donated it to the Toronto Club. Now the Canadian Motorcycle Association, if you were going to have Canadian national championships in any race for any 50-lap race, 100-lap race, whatever, sidecar race, it was in Toronto. Until a guy named Joe Barabo came along in 1911, and that kind of changed. Now, the inscription, by the way, in that Toronto is an S. Bogan, an S. License, a C.D. Cooley, and an F. Craig. Tom is currently researching those riders, who they are or who they were, if they were anybody, but they won the first Dunlop Trophy in 1911 in Toronto. Interesting to note that in 1914, the trophy was won by an Indian team. It was a team that won it in 1914 in Toronto. H.W. Kipp, E. McIntosh, and Winnipeg's own Joe Barabo. Why was Joe winning a trophy in 1914 at the Canadian Championships in Toronto? Well, Mark will verify this, but my research from the archives show that after Joe, and I'm going to get to his record here, he moved to work for the Indian factory in 1911. And then when they opened up the new Toronto plant, let's send the Canadian to our new plant. Joe goes to Toronto. I'm not sure if that's where you met your grandmother or not, but I'll have to do some more homework on that, but could be. You'll school me on that. Anyway, he begins working for the Indian Motorcycle Company in the new practice. He's a sales rep. I don't know what he does, but he works for Indian in Toronto, Ontario. Joe and the Kirkfield track in Winnipeg are stories in themselves. This is what I was telling Mark. I said, we need to do a restoration just on his grandfather and the Kirkfield racetrack. That's probably a half-hour one, and I'm not known to short time, but my God, there's a lot of information on that Kirkfield track. The Kirkfield track is now where Heritage Victoria Community Club is, north of Sturgeon Road, Nest to Silver. It was a 1-mile track created in 1907, 1908. In 1908, you know who came to race in that track? In a car? Like we had car racing here in 1908? Barney Oldfield. They charged the people a 50-cent surcharge for a showing fee, that he was an appearance fee to come. I mean, and there was thousands of people. The stands held thousands of people. And if you ever went up there about 20 years ago and went north of Ness, there would be a row of fir trees that kind of went to nowhere. Well, Ross Smith reminded me that that was the entrance into the racetrack. I've got an aerial photography picture of it in 1930, but it died shortly after World War I. Mark's grandfather, Joe, on that track in the summer of 1911, attempted to be the first human being to go a mile a minute for 100 miles. He tried in the summer. He failed, Mark. Did you know that? He didn't make it. The engine seized. It overheated. It was summertime. No problem. Oil trouble? I'm going to put an oil tank on the back, and I'm going to do it in October. So he goes there on October 16th, 1911. After a couple laps, and he's doing 65, 67 miles an hour, he's en route to do 100 miles at 60 miles an hour. The oil tank's causing wind resistance. They remove it on the fly with a sidecar outfit. They oil him up on the fly with a sidecar outfit. They gas him up on the fly with a sidecar outfit. Bill Pelham, who's a name, and I talked to the granddaughter in California, he was a racer in his own right. He was Bill's, as Joe's assistant, gassing him up. Well, at the end of the day, after doing 100 miles, he averaged 60-point-something miles an hour. The first human being on Earth to do 60 miles an hour for 100 miles. And it was done in St. James on the Kirkfield racetrack. So is Joe in the Hall of Fame? Damn right he is. Dunlop Trophy in 1911 has been in the possession of the Manitoba Motorcycle Club its whole life, as they were the dominant club organizing races. The Winnipeg Motorcycle Club, 1909. Maybe they started earlier. I don't know if you got pictures before 9, but that's all I can find. Fizzled out somewhere during World War I. I'm going to say about 17, and we don't know why. MMC was dominant, or they lost all their members in a trench. Who knows? Either are possible. Restoration after the fire of 20-ish from the clubhouse burning down, which was over in St. Vital. Thanks should be given to David Pritchard. We restored all the woodwork here back to the original style with the original oak. Well done, David. John Thompson did a lot of work with the replating. Ziggy Clan was responsible for getting it retrieved. And I did a, sorry.
And Craig Kraft.
And Craig Kraft. We should add that to the list, because Craig Kraft probably pulled it right out of the dust and then Ziggy retrieved it. You're absolutely right. I was going to mention that. And of course, Tom Wilcock, the guy from Toronto. Why? Because this got lost, the little motorcycle guy, melted or whatever. It's probably pewter, it melted. Tom pulled it off the original 1911, had it professionally casted, had it completely made of the same material, and then he had it silver plated. People in the MMC, when I was a member 50 years ago, chrome plated it. Ooh. Anyway, it's all back to nickel again. Tom wouldn't take a nickel for doing this, Tom Wilcox. And what's missing around the outside of this, on this rim here, is a beaded finish. Tom just emailed me last night. He says, I'm working on trying to get the beads off my trophy to copy it for you. I went, wow. So stay tuned, folks. We have one last upgrade on this. Tom Wilcox explained how he helped our trophy restoration in 2010. He's now working on the beaded trim from the missing piece. And that is the history of Canada's oldest one. Now, Tom believes, I think I said this, I'll say it one last time, he believes there were only the two. The Toronto donation and the Winnipeg, the Manitoba Motorcycle Club. The Toronto one went through two hands to get where it is. This one was owned by one club its entire time. That's it. The Dunlop Trophy. Thank you.
Wow.
I came here earlier today and took pictures of the 1912. It was given on a solo route to a guy named Moorhouse. Sure, it's donated in 11 because they made it in 11, but we probably didn't have it up for competition until 12. Moorhouse wins the solo. Then nobody wins it. World War I get in the way, or they just did other things? 22, it's solo by Brown. 24, sidecar, Sproul. 25, sidecar, Sproul. Sproul must have been a hell of a racer. 25, solo, Winters. Interesting. Brown and Winters both won this. That's another story, folks. They opened up Harley. Northwest Cycle beat them to the punch. And then they ended up opening an Indian dealership over by Osborne, right across from where the Safeway was. Another story. I think Rain Man ran a picture. Then 25 is a sidecar by Sproul again. 26 is solo by Fox Decent. I believe that's a descendant of Wally Fox Decent, the MP. So, I mean, a lot of history here. And I heard there was a motorcycle descendant of Wally Fox Decent. So this has got to be that guy. Check it out. Sidecar, Paul Obert. And there was that was in 26. And then there was an award handed out to a guy, Douglas, in 32. It jumped all the way up to 32. Well, 25-26 is the year the Kirkfield track shut down for good. They moved out of there in World War I to race automobiles somewhere else, but motorcycle people continued to race where horses used to race because that was enough. So I think when the Kirkfield track shut down, this maybe had one more time to race after that in 32, and they started handing out their own trophies. Even when I was going to the Manitoba Motorcycle Club and Ziggy and I were there 50 years ago, and the Charltons, and you guys were kids then, but they had their own trophies for handing out for this race and that race, and Jim remembers that, and Della, of course, remembers that. But so we've lost a lot of those trophies, but that's what I'm assuming. So just as a sidebar, we used to, the Red River X used to be here, right beside this, the Red River X. That's why the streetcar came to Headingley, because the Red River X was here. This is called the Manitoba Fair. And then they moved it to McPhillips. Remember old exhibition grounds? They play football and shit there now. Well, that's the 1930s. Well, now this becomes defunct in the 30s. Well, guess who picked it up? The Manitoba Motorcycle Club. That's where all the racing was. I remember I wrote the story about the Life Too Short. The guy that died in 36 was on this track on one of these turns. And then, of course, the old X packs it in and goes to Polo Park. And then Polo Park packs it in, and it's at Assiniboine Downs now. Where it'll be next, who knows? Anyway, that's just a sidebar. That's my theory on why this thing probably only went heavy for the 8 years. The racetrack probably shut down, and the whole maybe Dunlop sponsorship ended because their car track. I don't know. because they sponsored car racing from day on. We'll never know unless you can find that out. I couldn't. I've been through all kinds of newspapers. Bella.
When did the track at Sturgeon and Portage, where the Grace Hospital,
Okay, that track was in the 1950s. Those of you who remember when we first started this club, Len Hardy and Ray Hood used to bring film when they were racing there. Ray used to fly over in the air and Tiny used to follow the contour. It was interesting because you could get my drift. Sorry, Bella, no disrespect. But that was right where would be the front doors of the Grace Hospital. Before there was a Grace Hospital, that's just a field, and that's the creek, Sturgeon Creek. But that would have been called the Sturgeon Creek Racetrack.
Yeah,
There was a
TT
quarter.
track.
Sorry?
TT track, not a flat track.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And there was also a quarter mile, that little quarter midget race car used to race where Princess Auto was across the street from the Kirkfield Motel. There used to be a quarter mile racetrack there. And I lived in goddamn St. James, and I don't remember it. It had to be 50s. So I must have been just too young or
Our
something.
brothers used to race there, Jerry St. Laurent, all those
Yeah,
guys.
okay, you remember. It was right across from the Kirkfield Hotel, right where Princess Auto would be. There was a quarter mile dirt track for that quarter midget race car raced there after it raced at the Blue Bomber games when they shut that down. Anyway, so yes, that's a famous racetrack, and that's on film. Now Ray Hood was a terrible filmer, but the Len Hardy tapes he was really good. So those Len Hardy tapes of the racing at those things, showing all those guys, it's too bad because those guys could name all the guys in the picture. And the other guy that had great films was Irv Lowen, and Big Greg there's been working with the daughter trying to get some of it, but the son's hoarded it all and we can't seem to pry him out of him, but we're working on it. So thanks, Greg, you've done, that stuff will get launched too. There's a bit of, that's all Manitoba racing, although some of it, I mean, another story, Irv Lowen rode his 36 Sport Scout and raced at Daytona. No, he didn't win, but he left to Winnipeg in February on a 36 Indian to race in Daytona. I don't even leave in February in a car. Jesus. Anyway, that's it.
Awesome. Thank you, Ross. Appreciate it. So yeah, we definitely go back a long way